Good evening and welcome to Gibson's Bookstore Remote. Welcome joining us today on Earth Day. It is Earth Day, right? I checked the
It is.
calendar. It is Earth Day, and we are here with two authors joining us this evening to celebrate Dayna Lorentz's Book of a Feather. She is joined by her friend, author Alex London, who is the author of the Skybound Saga, and also coming in September, City of Thieves, Battle Dragons #1. We are very pleased to have these two authors joining us this evening. Their books are available from Gibson's Bookstore. Dayna is sending us signed book plates as well. We are available for curbside pickup, online shopping, and for shipping, and in-store browsing. Thank you very much for the two of you for joining me this evening.
Thank you so much for having us.
Here, yay!
So, talk to me about birds. Tell me all about your books.
Well, I was going to start tonight by doing a reading from Of a Feather. It's really super short, a little prologue to sort of get us into the mood of thinking about owls and birds and their lives. So this is the prologue. Yes, and Alex is going to dramatically represent what's going on in the scene. All right, so this is the prologue, and it's from Rufus the Owl's point of view. This book is told from two points of view. It's from an 11-year-old girl named Rini and from a 6-month-old great horned owl named Rufus. And this is from Rufus, and I don't know if anybody in the audience has an older sibling or is a younger sibling, but you know, sometimes siblings fight. I don't know, I've heard that. Maybe some of you guys have experienced that. So here we go. The vole sticks its twitchy little nose out of the shadows and tastes the air with its whiskers. It thinks that no owl is watching. Think again, vole. This great horned owl has his eyes on you. I can picture it perfectly. The wind will ruffle my feathers as I dive. I'll feel the fur beneath my talons, and then snap! Breakfast. There's a crash, and the tree branches shiver with the impact. It's my sister first. The sun's been down for an hour and you're still in the nest, she squawks. I don't know why she's here. She fledged last week. Mother twittered with pride, watching first silhouette disappear into the trees. I tried not to notice Father glaring down his beak at me, like he doubted I'd ever fly off on my own. Shouldn't he be somewhere else in the forest? I hoot in reply. Doesn't mean I can't slap by to check in on my favorite runt. Actually, it does mean that, I grumble. You should be claiming territory, some other territory. First narrows her eyes, rouses her feathers. Who says I haven't? This owl says. I can tell from the low angle of her ear tufts, from the grumble in her hoots that she hasn't. I feel a little bad for her. I want to give her a bit of a nibble on the beak. But then she lifts her tufts and chirrups. At least I'm not shivering in my feathers at the thought of hunting my own food. That's the first I grew up with, always pecking you right between the eyes, where it'll hurt most. I contemplate slashing her with a talon. I am working on a plan. Planning is for prey. You're a great horned owl. You hunt, you catch something, or you don't, and you try again. You have your way, I have mine. I turn my eyes back to the vole hole. First bobs her head, widens her eyes. Care for a game of talons? Now I'm suspicious. Talons is a game Father invented for us to prepare us for the real forest, he said. We start on trees on opposite sides of a clearing, and whoever forces the other one to the ground wins. First has fledged. She's in the real forest. How bad must things be going for her to want to play with me? Gah, who gives a hoot? This is first. She'll figure it out. Not now, I twitter, and pull my feathers into my body, hunker my head down between my wings. I'm studying. Need I say that I was not the greatest player of talons? Need I mention that first, being the first to hatch, is bigger and stronger, and perhaps this is unrelated to our hatch order? Ruthless? What, first tweets? Is baby second afraid of stepping a toe out of the nest? She blinks her eyes, top lid down, then clear guard lid across. When I don't answer, she flaps off the branch. Even owls have a hard time hearing other owls. Our feathers are so fluffy. They melt into the wind, become a part of it, so nothing, not our prey, not ourselves, can hear our approach. So it's only when first slams her talons down in the center of our nest, a wide circle of sticks father stole from a red-tailed hawk back in the dead of winter, that I realize she hasn't left for good. She grabs a clump of molted feathers from the nest and drops them on my head as she wings off. She's not taking no for an answer. I take a tentative step out onto a branch. First, I hoot quietly, are we starting? Should I fly out to the clearing? The ripples of wind from her wings hit me just before she bops me on the head with her feet. Already started. Great beak! I stumble, miss a talon, and am off the tree and flapping through the night. I weave between the branches, twisting with the air as it curls around obstacles. The forest gives way to grass, and I scan the stars for first. She's already swooping down towards me. I flip my feet forward, but too slowly, so I duck my head and dive, and she misses. That's cheating, she cries, carving through the night to make another pass. I'll try this move I saw Father use on an eagle who attacked our nest. I pull my wing in a bit and dip it down. I should flip over so that my talons are where my back would be, then swirl back around. But the air current tugs too hard. Instead of a graceful twist, I flop over onto my back in midair and begin to drop, upside down and with no way to flap. Help! First snatches my feet in her talons, drags me back up into the nest. What was that supposed to be? She drops me like a piece of prey onto the sticks. It's a special flip technique I'm testing out, I chirp with as much dignity as I can muster. First blinks slowly. Planning, testing, she hoots. Maybe you should stay in the nest, brother. Out in the forest, you either do it or you're prey. She lifts off and disappears into the darkening blue. It's full dark by the time Mother returns to the nest with a rat, which she lays at my feet. Was your father here? I thought I heard hooting. No, I answer. It was just me, practicing. Mother nibbles my tufts. My little perfectionist, even practicing his hoots. I bob my head away from her beak. Mother, I squeak, then try again in a decent hoot. Mother, should I? Am I? Do you think? She tilts her head as if trying to locate the rest of my hoots inside me. Every owl fledges in their own time. She pushes the rat toward me. Eat something. I look down at the rat, then back at the vole hole. You either do it or you're prey, first it squawked. I push the rat back toward Mother. You eat it, I hoot. I'm catching my own breakfast. Mother twitters softly, then flaps off into the night. She left the rat. I managed to ignore it until the sun pinks the edges of the sky, but then I gobble it down before closing my eyes to sleep. And that's the prologue to Of a Feather.
Yay!
Oh,
I love not only how well you enter the owl's perspective and the owl world, how you use that to introduce us to a ton of information about owls and birds of prey, and you do it so seamlessly. And there's a lot of stuff I want to ask you about that. I guess I want to start with how did you capture throughout the book Rufus the owl's voice? How do you capture an owl voice? How do you get yourself into an owl point of view? You are not yourself an owl, correct?
I mean, last time I checked, no. But I did do a lot of research. And so I spent a lot of time watching owls the same way you guys are watching us tonight. I would watch YouTube videos. There's really cool live streams that Audubon societies and the Cornell Bird Institute, they will run these live streams of nests. And it is really cool to just watch owls just being owls. And I went and visited owls. We have an amazing bird rehabilitation center here called VINS. And they have a great horned owl there who I spent a lot of time, in a staring match with, because the owl didn't move unless I went away. And then I would like jump back around and look into their cage, and the owl would have like be walking like one step and then instantly like stop. But yeah, so I watched a lot of videos. I read a lot of books about owls. And the more I sort of researched them, researched how they work, what their lives are like. I watched a lot of documentaries about owls. It helped me to really sort of put myself sensorily into their space. I think that's another thing that, in terms of researching animals, the coolest piece is that you get to experience the world in a different way. So I wrote a series from a dog's point of view, and I researched, how do dogs experience the world differently from people? And it was the same thing with owls, sort of thinking about, okay, I don't have hands as an owl, but I have feet, and I can fly. I have two eyes, but I can't move my eyes. So, in writing, a scene, I can't have a character, I feel like First would have rolled her eyes several times in that scene, but owls can't roll their eyes. Interestingly, their eyes are fixed in their heads. And just thinking about all of those different things, the physical, sort of watching them, so the experience of them helped me to sort of put myself really into an owl's head and try to sink my way into their experience of the world.
One of the fascinating things, when you're doing falconry books and writing about birds of prey, you learn a lot. When I was doing my Skybound Saga books, which are all centered on falconry, there's a cult in the books, a cult of a matriarchal cult of they're called owl mothers, and they only use
so cool.
And I learned a lot of owl facts, and there were some amazing bird facts one picks up in the research process. Do you have a favorite owl fact that didn't make it into the book? Some sort of owl knowledge you can drop on us right now that you didn't get to use in the book?
Well, I mean, it takes place in the book, but I didn't really focus on how cool it is because it's a tad gross. But it's the fact that owls, they eat their prey whole, like most raptors, but then they have to they spit up this pellet. And the pellet is sort of all the parts of whatever they've eaten that they couldn't digest. And so it's sort of all the fur and bones. And if they eat a bird, it's the feathers. And when you can actually buy online, or you could go to a science museum like I did and have the opportunity to dissect it's been cleansed, but you can dissect an owl pellet and figure out what an owl has really eaten in a day. And it's used by scientists to figure out sort of what animals are eating within the environment, to figure out the health of an ecosystem and that kind of thing. But if you're just kind of a nosy Parker like me and like to do that, you get to go to a science museum and they give you one of these, which is I dissected my owl pellet, and these are all the little bones that we found, and they put it on a clear piece of tape for me to take home with myself. And I have to say, the only weird thing about this is my cats are really kind of weirdly obsessed with this. So.
What did that owl eat?
I couldn't get all of the little pieces out of the fur in a neat way to put on the tape, but there's like a little skull right over here and like a little scapula, but it was just a couple of voles, basically. Owls, they eat a lot of small rodents, especially great horned owls.
Birds of prey are gruesome. I think that's one thing that in writing about them, you end up having to become very comfortable with blood and viscera and just gross stuff.
I think you see video, like the pictures they don't put up a lot of sort of the birds of prey, the ones where their like beaks are smattered in blood, where they've like just made a kill and they're like, I'm eating over here. I think, an interesting writing thing for me is one of the early drafts of this book. So in Rufus's point of view, he interacts with a lot of different animals, and I had to decide, can he understand all of the animals in nature, or can he only understand some? And I had one draft where there's a scene where he kind of catches a vole, and then there are a bunch of other rodents sort of running at him out of a field where a thresher has started up. And I had the animals squeaking at him and talking to him, and my critique partners were like, I don't know, that's a little dark if the mouse can be like, help, don't eat me. Well, I mean, you don't want the food interacting with the owl. So I decided that he couldn't understand anything except birds, and he really only understands birds of prey. Other raptors can talk to raptors. He can sort of understand crows, and he understands they don't like him, but that was sort of an interesting sort of writing decision I had to make.
That's fascinating world building, right? You're having to do world building even though you're writing about our natural world. You're inventing the rules, which I think is very, very cool. Why an owl? Of all the birds of prey, why owls?
Well, the book started really with my daughter, and honestly, I was never a bird person growing up. I mean, I'm a dog and horse girl, and giant squids now. I'm huge into squids, but birds always look to me like little dinosaurs. Even I think before science was really with that. They don't move their eyes. It was kind of scary, but my daughter became obsessed with owls, and so this is how I started on my journey of YouTube, finding owl videos and things for her. And as I got to learn more about them with her and visiting them at these different facilities, I came to really love them and to love their perspective and to love they are incredibly fierce. They live an incredibly hard life. It's tough out there for an owl. But especially owls like great horned owls or barred owls, they're incredibly adaptable. They can really sort of change with what's in the area and make a life for themselves. And that kind of resilience really spoke to me. And then sort of in terms of writing a story, I decided, well, what if I took an owl who really isn't going to cut it in the owl world? I mean, at one point, Rufus decides that he's just sort of the worst great horned owl in the history of owldom. And then putting him together then with this girl who has, because of the circumstances of her life, had to become really tough and closed off and a lot more mature than her 11 years would have otherwise made her, and seeing how they can help each other change and how their stories combine, and through that connection they can sort of help each other grow.
That's one of the things I loved, is that you wrote something. I think I love it when it's done well, and it's so hard to do well, is to write that middle grade rage, like that moment in life, especially for a character like Rini, who you're growing up and the world's been tough on you, and you're still figuring stuff out, and you don't feel exactly comfortable in yourself and in your life, and you're kind of angry about it. And I think you capture that so well, and it's such an interesting juxtaposition, learning to be a falconer with that, and learning to man a bird of prey, because you really have to get your emotions in check, because they are high strung and will not go along with you if you're freaking out all the time, or if you're giving off weird vibes. How did you create that relationship? Was that a deliberate juxtaposition?
It was definitely a deliberate juxtaposition. And I feel like all of the pieces of the story started coming together like over time, and then it all clicked. Like I read H is for Hawk, which is a fantastic adult nonfiction book, memoir about falconry, and I was just sort of like, oh my God, this is amazing. There's this incredible scene where the author is playing with this goshawk she's trying to train. And I was just like, this is amazing. Like, I want to be in the goshawk's head. Like, what does the goshawk think is going on in this scene? And so I wrote that in my book. I was just like, I got to write a scene from the owl's point of view as to what they think is going on when the human is playing them. What do they think about a human? But I think, when I know you did this too. So I got to have the opportunity as a part of researching this book to take a falconry lesson. And so I actually got to fly a Harris hawk, which is, not a this is a picture of me with the Harris hawk. And having the opportunity to do that, I learned so much about the idea of the partnership, as someone who grew up with dogs, and how dogs, are really always looking to you and taking cues from you, but they're really your pet. The idea in falconry that they're a partner, they're not a pet. And that they can fly away at any time. They're flying free. If they decide they don't want to be with you anymore, you're training them for falconry doesn't change them from being a wild bird, especially if it's like it is in America, where you can catch a wild bird of prey and train it if you're licensed to hunt with you.
Yeah, that's what drew me first to writing about falconry, was the relationship. Actually, it started with H is for Hawk, interestingly enough.
The book that spawned 1,000 books.
And for me, that relationship and that tension was the perfect kind of operating literary device for a young adult novel, because it felt a lot like First Love, where you're in this complex, delicate relationship that you don't exactly understand, but that can hurt you. And it can end suddenly and you'll never understand why. It's just gone, or you can be deeply bonded. And it was the moment when I went and did a falconry lesson with this master falconer, where he brought out his most tame bird that he'd had for, I think, 11 years. And, showed me what to do. And he said, we're going to fly. We'll see if JJ was the bird's name. We'll see if JJ, what was, I think, a Cooper's. We'll see if JJ will fly today. No, it must have been a Harris hawk. They're the easiest. I think it was a Harris hawk. We'll see if JJ will fly today. We'll see if JJ will come back today. You never know. If this is the time, then JJ's done. And just like, I've flown JJ demonstrations and a million lessons, but today could be the day. And something struck me so powerfully about that, especially in writing books for young people, where, when you're young and you're feeling out these relationships and you're just starting to get your sense of independence, this idea that there's this thing you love, but if you do something wrong that you might never even know you've done wrong, it could all ruin it. That's terrifying. And I think speaks really authentically to what it is to start to grow up. And I think in Rini's learning, you really captured some of that energy and that emotion.
Yeah, and I think that she, I was putting her with, because we get Rufus's point of view. I think we kind of there's less fear. I mean, the tension in the book becomes he doesn't want to fly away, and he has to. But and I think that's a really interesting thing. I mean, I feel like this version of falconry and this particular bird is a bird who is very good in this story, in a middle grade story, where the idea that I was trying to get across was talking about how connection can help you to grow and develop. And I feel like in Black Wings Beating, that I love that idea that, yeah, it is like first love, and there is always that tension and the danger, the idea that you're also working with something that's dangerous. And I mean, in that story, obviously, Bryson is going after something very dangerous, but very big. And that, those are great stakes.
Can you talk more about that tension within the story between Rufus, the idea of wildness versus safety, civilization versus the brutality of the wild?
Yeah,
and because I thought you balanced that really well, and that tension within him and with Rini trying to get him to fly free and wild.
Well, I think, I was trying to write a book that's set here in Vermont. I'm from Vermont. I set the book actually in this sort of central part of the state. And the idea of, owls are living around, sort of urban developments around people. These are animals that are having to negotiate life as a wild animal with people. And I actually managed to hear a great horned owl right outside my window one night in the middle of the night. I was sort of woken by the hooting. It was so exciting, but it was also kind of like, oh my God, they're right here, living around us. And great horned owls can be found all over the United States, and so you too could have a great horned owl living nearby. And that tension where this isn't just a wild animal living somewhere out in the middle of nowhere that you couldn't see. I mean, this is an animal that's living right next door, and how does that impact our relationship? And I feel like writing a story where you get to sort of live life through vicariously through the owl's point of view. In the real world, I tried to make this book as realistic as possible from the owl's point of view, could hopefully lead to, kids being much more, being curious, understanding a little bit more about sort of what an owl's life is like nearby. And, the tension is always, that animals are really cute. And a great horned owl would be really like an awesome thing to go up and take a picture of her. Maybe I could go out and like leave a mouse for it and put a mouse in a cage somewhere for it and get the great horned owl to come in and visit me. But they're still a wild creature, and you can't do that. And one of the tensions in the book really is Rini, once she falls in love with Rufus and they do have this connection, how can she make that choice to say, okay, well, I can keep you safe, I can give you a great life, but it's not a wild owl's life, and it's also illegal. Putting that aside, why would I send my precious owl who I've saved back into this wild world where everything isn't safe? And I think because that's life, that way he can have the full life that he wants to have. And I think I try to parallel that to Rini's story, where she's forced to make some choices, where she's choosing where choices are being made from her that are forcing her also to move in a direction that isn't necessarily the safest or the most the direction that has the clearest path, but that that is part of growing up, that for both Rufus and Rini and for all of us. And part of the story though is well, how do we make that move? How do we move into those sort of dangerous spaces where we are putting ourselves out there a little bit more without being totally at a loss and alone? And that's this idea of connection and allowing yourself to be a little bit vulnerable and saying, what, I need a little help, like I need a friend, and I have a friend.
I think you do that so well with the parallel too between Rini learning to let Rufus go and the adults in Rini's world, and sort of Rini is going on this version of a journey, emotionally that kids go through. And I think that's so cool. And I want to ask, this is a question I love hearing from authors, because writing is a weird process. And you can answer this whether it's Rini or Rufus. What have your characters in this book taught you?
Oh, well, I think that the real, I mean, Rufus, when I started writing him, he was sort of right there for me. His voice was the, like, you know, he appeared on the page and I was like, oh my God, like he was speaking to me. I was
Full adorable murder bird glory.
Exactly. He was there for me. And Rini, though, especially, I think just given who she is and who she is at the beginning of the book, especially, it was really hard for me to get her on the page. I kept on getting sort of editorial notes or critique group notes. I love Murder Bird. But the notes basically like, well, I don't know what she, like, see what she's doing, but I don't know what she's feeling. Like, I can't get into her head. I don't really know where we are. And so I think that part of that was also just being patient and waiting for me to sort of allow her to be herself in the scene, and allowing, you know, I think you mentioned some of that rage and that anger. It's hard to write in a way that isn't alienating. And I think, you know, that was part of it, is that she was so angry that she was alienating, and how to communicate that in a way that isn't alienating was a real learning process for me in terms of the story.
Can you talk about the revision process of that? I think one of the things that always blows kids' minds with writing books is how many drafts we do and how they don't come out perfect the first time. Can you talk a little about how she changed over the drafts?
Oh my gosh, yes. Well, this book definitely went through a bunch of iterations. I don't know what your process is. We should go back and forth on the process piece, because this book, I wrote one whole draft. I gave it to my agent and she had a bunch of comments, and basically I started then from a blank page and rewrote the story. I find sometimes, and this happens to me a lot, the first draft of the book is really me figuring out what the book I wanted to write was, and then having to sort of start from a blank page and write the book that I discovered in writing the first draft of the book I thought I was writing. And I do a lot of different process, you know, so that's the functional thing. To get me to that next level, I usually will write a first draft, and then I'll start trying to figure out, well, wait, what do I have on the page? And so I'll use all sorts of fun little tools like this. I mapped out all of the chapters, and so you can see some of them are in the different colors or for the different points of view, just to figure out, what did I actually create here, and how does it sort of all flow together? What are the emotions as I go through each chapter? How do they develop? How do they connect with each character?
Talk to me about that board more. I'm so curious by authors who are organized. So what's the pink?
Oh, well, the pinks are just, this is add conflict, one of those helpful notes you make for yourself as you're rewriting a book. And so, you know, these were me making notes to myself, and some of these may have fallen off because there were many other notes that were had. But this is sort of, I was trying to get myself, as I said, into the emotional life of the characters and making sure they meld. So I have the chapter number, and then I write the emotions that the characters have at the top of each thing. So this is a version where Rini was the first. I also started with Rini. The prologue was a late addition to the book, actually. But here she's frustrated, scared, jealous, anxious, sad. So, you know, just sort of trying to put all of her emotions down, and then just the plot of what happens so that I could figure that out.
And is that, you do that emotional piece ahead of time, or is this like after the first draft you create?
This is after the first draft. So this is me making a map of the first draft that I had.
That is so cool. I'm just always, I love hearing how the writers, you know, you talk about plotters and pantsers is the thing. Pantsers being people who fly by the seat of their pants, and
yes, each color
plotters
was coordinated to the two characters.
Yeah.
And it was, so I think, you know, I'm definitely, this book was a pantser. I feel like I had these ideas. The owl piece came together. The falconry piece came together with H is for Hawk. And then I had worked in the foster care industry when I first graduated from college. I worked at a residential treatment center in New York State. And now I actually am a staff attorney with the family court here in Vermont. So I see these cases a lot. And it was something that I was really drawn to, these stories, and wanted to write about that. So as those pieces came together, and I finally did have the story and started writing, you know, I think it was kind of a pantser project to write that first draft. But, you know, I feel like only through that first draft did I realize that I was way off in that one, and let me start again and then start using these tools to help me coordinate myself. And then, you know, once you get to a later stage, I started mind mapping to make sure that it all made sense, and I was connecting all the big themes that I wanted to connect. So this is, you know, this craziness here is like the summary of the chapter, and then all the ideas I hope are expressed in the chapter, and me trying to connect up all the plot points as to how they link themselves together.
That's
But yeah,
amazing.
lots of bananas. I love markers, and I love big pieces of paper. So you can see the and I love Post-it notes. So it's all comes together.
You really should be like a Staples influencer. You know, they should be
Oh yeah,
free.
Staples. If you want to, I will influence. I'm into the Post-it notes and the markers. I'm here for it.
So I got a few more questions I want to ask, but I want to warn our audience that I hope you will have questions for us. And so I want to give you like a, 5-minute or so, 5 or 10-minute warning that you are going to be called upon to ask questions, because otherwise we'll end up just staring at each other in silence over this technology, and that's super awkward. So if there are questions you want to ask, pop them into the chat, and we will get to them. Other questions I want to ask you. So was there actually, was there an aha moment for you when the different pieces, when your experience in the foster care system and I want to write about owls, and falconry is the thing that exists, when all that clicked together? Was it one moment, or was it a gradual thing?
I think it was a gradual thing. I think it required, sort of thinking about how I would want to position all of those different pieces together. And as I thought more about sort of what kind of bird would I want to put in here? And I definitely also read some mentor texts on falconry. So there's an older falconry book called My Side of the Mountain by Jean Craighead George, which is about a boy who sort of goes into the wilderness and don't do this, but he took a baby peregrine falcon out of its nest and trained it for falconry.
It was a different time.
It's a different time. It was still illegal. And what's great is as you get to the later books, she's kind of brings that piece in as well. And then there was this great middle grade book that came out, I think either last year or the year before, called Falcon Wild by Terry Lynn Johnson, which is more of an adventure survival story with falconry. And just seeing how other authors were using that. I definitely love writing animal fantasy. I think as I was growing up, books with animal characters, I was always drawn to. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a horse girl, so I loved Black Beauty. And what's weird is I recently reread Black Beauty with my daughter, who is also becoming a horse girl. And I think the social criticism that she put forward in that book, through the animal's point of view, through the horse talking about how hard life was as a horse in that story, and how the hard life was for all the horses that Black Beauty got to meet. And I forgot that Black Beauty was a boy horse. Actually, going in, I somehow had recast him as a girl horse. But just the way the whole story worked, and I think that is another powerful piece about writing from animals' point of view, is that they do I think Black Beauty is a lot more direct than I tried to make the story. But I feel like reading that book, put me so much. I was so upset and was like, I gotta save horses in the 19th century London. Something's gotta give. But here, I include some notes at the end of this book, just sort of talking about, I had some experts who worked with me both in falconry and in bird rehabilitation, and just trying to raise awareness with kids. Something as simple as a soccer net that's left up, can end up being a real hazard for an owl who doesn't see the net. And that's a big thing that bird rehabilitators have to go out and help. So hopefully that's another piece of this book that kids will read Rufus's point of view and start thinking about, the owls in their lives that they may not even know are there.
So Virginia in the chat asked
Hello.
if it was always a dual point of view book, or if that evolved in the process. Was Rufus's point of view always part of the plan?
It was always part of the plan. I love writing from an animal's point of view. I love getting into the head of an animal. Growing up, we had dogs, and we would always, talk to the dogs as if they were members of the family. Like dinner would be occurring, and we would speak for the dogs. And so I've always sort of lived my life in conversation with animals. And so it seemed entirely natural for me that if I'm going to have an owl in this book, the owl has got to be talking and doing his thing.
So when I started writing my falconry series, I very deliberately didn't, until later in the book you get into an animal's head, but the entire sort of ignition switch for the book was that I felt like I couldn't get into the head of a bird of prey, that their intelligence was so alien to ours. So I was like, I have no way to do this. Let's write about that. And it actually came from I misremembered a C.S. Lewis quote from one of his lesser sci-fi novels. There's this planet where all the different, there's like 3 species and they can all communicate with each other, and there's a human visiting this planet, and one of the aliens on this planet says to the human, I feel bad for you. On your planet you can't talk to all the animals and stuff on your planet. You'll never know the thoughts that float on other bloods than your own, was how I remembered it. And the original name for my series was called Other Bloods. It turns out that was not the actual quote.
That's a great quote, though.
I got it wrong.
Let's keep it.
The idea is still basically the same, though. But that idea that animals have a consciousness completely different from our own, and that I am fascinated by that, the non-human consciousness and how we recognize it as valid. And that, like animals are people too. Like they're not, but that doesn't mean they're less valid. Which is one of the things I love writing about animals because of.
I think for me, I try to bring out some of the tensions of like an owl's thoughts about, sort of the world, or not necessarily like their moral construct is not necessarily going to be the same. I think in writing Rufus, the way I wrote him, and because he's kind of such a sort of scaredy owl, he's kind of a little more in a space that's not as, sort of, I mean, he sees First as ruthless. First is just a good great horned owl. She's just out there cutthroat. Later in the book, you find out like her own dad sort of drove her out of his territory. They're surviving. They're right on the edge. But I think that what I'm drawn to in the animal stories is those moments where, and I think this is why at first, as I mentioned, I didn't connect with birds, because you couldn't look into their eyes and feel like they were looking back to you in a way that you could understand. I mean, I feel that, like with my dog, I feel that with my cats, I feel that. I now have 2 cats. And with horses, I always felt that like there was something communicating with us. Yeah. There was a great movie I watched recently called My Octopus Teacher, where even octopuses have brain structures that are entirely different than human brains. They developed on a different, branch, like very early on. Octopi ended up way away from sort of mammal brains. And yet in that movie, the filmmaker forms this connection with this little female octopus. And he notices things like that she plays, that she sort of would be experimenting with fish in a way that was really not hunting. And those connections between animals and people, like when you can see something that's so alien as an octopus playing, and you can say, oh my God, we have that in common. We both like to play with fish. It's those moments that for me are really, inspiring and exciting as a writer. And that's, as I mentioned in H's for Hawk, it was that scene where she's playing with her goshawk and that she's sort of remarking on felt really weird and alien. And I read that and I was like, this is my way in. Like that was where I sort of was like, oh, okay. Like you can play with something as sort of terrifyingly, you see a bird of prey and it feels so like focused. And I mean, they have to be focused. They sit in trees and watch for food, and they're so successful so few times out of the number of times they go to hunt. Their lives are very, focused. But to see a bird that could actually play, it was like, okay, now I get it. Now I'm there.
It's stressful being a bird. So
man.
Question asked in the chat: did you ever want to fly as a child or as an adult? Did you ever have the urge?
I mean, I'm afraid of heights. So I would never want to fly high. I feel like I'd be a little more like on a songbird level than necessarily, I mean, great horned owls don't migrate. So maybe I would be okay with a great horned owl level of flying. But when I think of, the birds that fly thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of miles, over the ocean, or, even a bird like a snowy owl. We have snowy owls. I'm sure they're in New Hampshire. They're definitely here in Vermont. And they've made it all the way down to at least LaGuardia. There's one of the birds at Vin's is named LaGuardia. And they travel thousands and thousands of miles. And I'm just like, I could not do that. Like they found them at the top of very tall skyscrapers in Manhattan. And I'm just like, no, I don't even like going out on top of those when I'm standing on the roof myself.
Yeah, no urge to fly for me either. Not really. I'm not even particularly afraid of heights. It just seems like a lot of work. It takes a lot of energy for a bird to fly, and I'm too lazy. I want to be a sloth. Like Chilling.
I'd like to be a giant squid. I mean, if I could be anything, just because they're mysterious, it's cold, it's
I'm
dark.
like, yeah, that's true. You're mysterious. I don't think of you as cold and dark though, as thriving in the cold and dark.
No, but I don't know. I think there is a part of me that is sort of it would be interested in that kind of environment. Like what's it like down in the sort of dark, deep ocean with the little glowing
Yeah.
creatures.
I also think birds are way too connected to social media. At least I noticed in your book, they're way too. They tweet a lot. Sorry, I apologize. I'm sorry. That was terrible.
Well, I mean, I think that it is cool how birds they do call across the night, and that you can hear bird call and you don't know where the bird is calling from. It is kind of that is the haunting thing about owls. In the middle of the night, you just hear this and you don't know where it's coming from, but it feels sort of menacing or threatening.
Did you, bird puns, having done a trilogy about birds and traveled all over the world signing copies of it, I feel like I've made every possible bird pun you can make at some point in the period during the time of promoting these books. I love bird
I'm really short on bird puns, so you got to slip a couple in.
I can't just make them, they got to come up naturally. Just wing it.
Indeed.
I'm supposed to tell us about the bird books attractively displayed over your shoulder. Oh, right. I'm not really here to promote myself, but yeah, I have a trilogy called the Skybound Saga. The first book is Black Wings Beating, right there. The second book is Red Skies Falling, and the third book is Gold Wings Rising. They're young adult epic fantasy, definitely like older teen epic fantasy set in a fantasy world of cutthroat falconry about two kids, a twin brother and sister, who go on a quest to capture the giant mythical ghost eagle that may or may not have killed their father.
Now, interestingly, for you to say that you're not particularly interested in flying, because your next middle grade series, which is coming out in the fall, is all about flying.
Yeah. It's completely about dragons. But my main character in that series, in Battle Dragons, is kind of afraid of heights. So.
Oh well, see.
It makes it hard to be a dragon battler. Oh, now I'm supposed to give the elevator pitch for Battle Dragons. Is basically the Fast and the Furious meets How to Train Your Dragon. It's gangsters. Yeah, that's a good pun. Sorry, I'm looking at the chat and getting distracted.
I know, there was a great pun.
Gangsters in a futuristic city who battle dragons for control of the criminal underworld, and the dragon riding police force that tries to keep them under control, and a kid who gets caught in the middle of all of it. So it's dragons. See, I am drawn to flying things, and I've noticed over my career, I mean, this is my 27th, 28th book, something like that. I've written about animals a lot.
Animals are great. My next book, I have another middle grade book coming out in January, so it's the past Battle Dragons. It's called Wayward Creatures, but that has a much more grounded community of animals. So I included a coyote, and there's a very funny little opossum. But yeah, no flying in that one. But
I love coyotes. In a series of talking animal fantasies I did called The Wild Ones, there's in the second book, there's a coyote bad guy who comes to rob the alleyway where the raccoon hero lives. He's like basically a bandit. He's like a bank robber. He rolls into town. He carries a stringless banjo with him, and animals lean in close to listen because they can't hear. And he says, "No, lean in closer, you can hear." And then he clubs them with it. He's a jerk.
Oh my!
Yeah, the animal world is brutal. Those were based on or inspired by the Redwall books by Brian Jakes, which were great talking animal books, but brutally violent.
Yeah, we
got to spread some opossum love.
Yeah, well, I think the whole idea of Wayward Creatures was this idea of, a coyote, is apparently, according to the research that I did, they are the most hated animal in America, more so even than like rats and cockroaches at one time. So it's fascinating that they're hated. And I think also opossums, people think they're kind of ugly, they're not, they're the only marsupial in North America, so they're kind of an odd animal out. And then I'm writing from the point of view of a boy who feels like he's kind of the odd man out, and that he's kind of angry, and that people don't really like him the way he thought they should be liking him. And these characters are sort of coming together, but they're all characters who are kind of at odds with, or feel like they're at odds with, the sort of world that they're put in.
There's an adorable picture book called Apple Blossom the Possum. You should check out.
Oh,
By Holly Goldberg Sloan and Gary Rosen. It's delightful. Love possums.
well, possums are great, and yes, they eat ticks, which is like sort of the coolest thing. And I think what's also interesting is they don't carry rabies. Everybody always talks about like rabid opossums, and they actually they're it's not a thing.
They're the best. Often the animals we malign are the ones who are out there just being awesome and trying to do their thing. I do need to get your thoughts before we run out of time. I need to get your
They look like giant rats. Yes.
The dragon puns. Okay. I learned a bird fact from, granted, someone who is a big time falcon person, but who told me an owl fact that I learned during the course of my research that I could not use because it didn't really fit the world. But about owls, and you're gonna get angry, so this is gonna be contentious. That owls are the dumbest of the birds of prey because their eyes take up so much of their brains, of their skulls. Something had to give, and their brains are tiny. Respond to this owl insult that has been hurled.
I will come to the defense of owls. Well, first of all, owls are awesome. But second of all, at least great horned owls are at the top of the food chain, and they'll pick fights with bald eagles. They take bald eagle nests. They're the only animal that eats skunks regularly because they have a terrible sense of smell, which is another interesting owl fact. But I'm defending them because they're just awesome survivors. They're fearless. They may be dumb, but they're fearless and they can't smell, so they're willing to eat the stuff that other people won't. And I think the other thing about owls is they have incredible hearing, and they actually have the best hearing of all the birds. And so, their brains may not have a lot of room for sort of intellectual musings, but they got it where it counts.
So if you had to be best friends with a bird, you're choosing owls, even though you're not going to be able to talk about Proust?
I mean, I don't talk about Proust in my daily life right now anyway. And I was a philosophy major, I've been through it all. So I'm happy to have my dumb but fierce owl friends.
Excellent. So we only have a few minutes left here. I want to just see if there's any.
They do have insanely long legs. And I think that's like the funniest owl fact is, you look at most birds of prey, they don't have those sort of fluffy chest feathers. And so, an eagle, but even an eagle, I feel like when it's standing, it looks like it just has these little tiny feet sticking out the bottom. Even this stuffed animal, it just has these little tiny feet. And meanwhile, like 30% of the bird when it stands up is all leg.
For anyone watching, if you haven't Googled owl legs, do it. It's amazing to see photos of this. They look ridiculous. It's wonderful.
It looks like they lift their skirts and they have these little like sort of fuzzy pants on their legs.
So through the course of doing this, are you a bird person now, of writing this book? Did it turn you into a bird person?
I've become a huge bird person. I mean, a thing I didn't mention is we started putting a bird feeder out when my kids were very little. It was, sort of something that I guess I thought we should do. We got a bird feeder, we hung it out the window, and we started having all these little songbirds come up. And I wanted to know, sort of what are they? What are these little birds? And as we started getting into their lives and watching, we had this one bird that I just couldn't identify. I'm like, it's some kind of finch, but it's brown. What is it? It's not in any of the Audubon things. I'm looking it online. And then it turned yellow. And it's goldfinches turn brown in the winter and then turn brilliant yellow by the time you're in the spring. And I was just like, my head exploded, sort of there was so much going on here, a whole world that I didn't know anything about. And so I'm a huge bird person now. I mean, I get very distracted while driving. I'm like, oh my God, there's a hawk.
Ironically, my husband hates birds, so spending years as a bird person was difficult for him. But we put up a oh yeah, and there was a question about where you got your curtains as well, that someone wanted to know where you got your curtains.
Home Goods.
Love the Home Goods.
Home Goods, yeah.
I think this owl actually came from Home Goods.
Well, that's a good looking owl. It's a very fluffy owl.
It's not actually, it's hard and kind of uncomfortable, but it looks fluffy.
Oh dear.
Yeah. It's deceptive. We put up a bird feeder that I love watching, but for a while we had a hawk who visited the tree right outside my office, which was amazing.
Ooh.
and really inspired me a lot in writing this series. But it turned our bird feeder, having that hawk there all the time, except for
Like
when the
salad
person
bar.
threw it away, it turned our bird feeder into a bird feeder.
Yeah.
So we ended up with a lot of bird corpses in the yard. That was fun. I would occasionally just find like a wing of something, usually a robin. And it was like, oh, our hawk friend's been here.
Well, I mean, it's fodder for the book. Everything
Yeah.
becomes, fodder for the creative process,
Mhm.
be it a wing or a.
I guess that's why my books are much more brutal than yours. But also the middle grade YA difference.
Yes.
I'm excited to be returning to the middle grade world with my next books.
It's a wonderful pool to be in. The water is warm.
And I feel like when you're that middle grade reader age, you never love a book as much as you do when you're 11, 12. Like they just sit differently. And I love writing.
Well, I think I was reading so many middle grade books, so my last series was a YA series. And then I started reading as my daughter entered sort of third and fourth grade. We started reading a lot more middle grade. There's this great book here, a book award in Vermont called it used to be the Dorothy Canfield Fisher Award. It's now called the Golden Dome Award. But they pick like 20 books, and my daughter was sort of on this quest to sort of read all of them every year. And so we started reading them, and I just became obsessed with how good middle grade is. There are just so many great books. And also, you can't write an animal point of view really into YA. Like that's going to be a lot trickier. And I think that it sort of presents a different issue. There's actually a fantastic YA book called Owl in Love, which is about a girl who turns into an owl. But that book, is I think one of the few YAs that kind of has a quasi animal point of view. But like in middle grade, there are so many great ones. I read this book. They came out, I think, 2 years ago, Song for a Whale.
That book.
This book is amazing and has a whale point of view in it. And I just loved those chapters so much.
So beautifully done, that whale point of view. Oh, that
oh
was
my God, yeah.
and award committee, and it stayed with me through hundreds of books. That one really stuck with me.
And I think, one of the real inspirations for me writing this book was Pax by Sarah Pennypacker, which I don't actually have a copy of right here, but just having a book that took so seriously the animal world and the animal side, and also pairing that then with the human story and combining those stories, and allowing them to sort of speak to each other. That was something that I was really drawn to. But yeah, the middle grade stories, there's just so many wonderful middle grade books. I feel like there's just an explosion in creativity and sort of playing with form, which was really exciting to me as a writer to come into.
You have definitely made an amazing addition to the wonderful middle grade universe and to the animals, and just the respect and love with which you treat both the human characters and the natural world in this book is just really a thing to behold. Everyone in the chat should buy a copy. They should buy like 10 copies, support local businesses, and thank you to Gibson for hosting us.
Yes, and thank you so much everyone for coming. You're muted.
There we go. Thank you to both of you for joining us this evening. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you to our chat for the bird puns and the dragon puns. This has been a delight. Dayna, the chat was going bananas over your plushies, which, by the way, we looked up. They're squishamallows. But people have been messaging me being like, please ask about the plushies. Please ask about the plushies.
New things to sell in the store.
We do carry squishamallows, and they're an amazing brand. Our favorite one this past year was the Plague Doctor one, which was glorious. It had like a little lantern and the nose. It was
they make the Cerberus, right? The 3-headed. Yeah, I really want that one.
I've never seen a squishamallow that I did not want to just squish.
Oh my gosh. I think you have to appreciate these things are so squishy. I mean, like they just you can really get into them. So I highly recommend them. They come in a ton of different sizes. I think this is the biggest.
We have a 2.5-year-old, and I feel like that's a good excuse for me to buy several of them and keep them for myself.
I'm not gonna lie, that has happened in my household. Yes, and it's a very pleasing tactile experience. I mean, it's just all around. But we're talking about your book, which is Of a Feather. And is available from Gibson's. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Dayna, Alex, and to our audience members. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank
Thank you
you.
guys.